Hello, builders of good. Thank you for tuning in to the Build Good Fundraising podcast. Fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. So on this show, we take the mystery out of raising money. Now, on every episode, we coach you to build your fundraising like a flywheel. The flywheel has 5 steps. Number 1 is listening to donors. Number 2 is engaging them and building community. Number 3 is asking the right people for the right things. Number 4 is celebrating every single gift at every level. And number 5 is reporting back in a real-time and responsive way. Now, if you master the 5 parts of the flywheel, your fundraising flywheel will start to spin reliably. Your revenue will grow, and so will your career, quite frankly. Now, every week, we focus on one part of the flywheel, and today, we are focusing on listening. There are 2 kinds of listening you can do when it comes to your donors, and if you're a fan of the show, you've heard us talk about both. Number 1 is you can look at your donor data. This is how donors are behaving and how they're acting, and oftentimes, donors speak to us loudest through their behaviors and actions. So oftentimes, if you look at your data, it will give you a whole bunch of insights. But data can tell you what the data is. It cannot tell you why it is. For that, you need the second kind of listening, which is donor conversations. Both donor conversations and donor data on their own are a bit of a low resolution picture, but you put them together and you can come up with all sorts of hypotheses that you might then be able to test and validate whether there's a there or not. And that's what we're talking about today. We are talking about running successful A/B tests in your organization so you can get meaningful insights to grow your revenue. And we are talking to Ronen Tal. He's the Director of Integrated Fundraising and Marketing at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, where his portfolio, the shop he runs, raises about $10 million annually from everyday kind and caring donors across the country, about 40,000 of those donors. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Ronen Tal. Ronen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I love how you described those high-resolution photos. Very nice.
Well, my hope for our listeners after today is that they can actually take that and do something with it. If somebody's been listening to this and they know, I should be testing more, I should be optimizing, I should be trying new stuff. They probably hear it on other podcasts about nonprofits need to be innovative, but what does that even mean? So I hope that at the end of this show, of the next 60 minutes, people actually have like a really tangible sort of idea of what the first step is to just testing something. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Testing is amazing and can be an incredibly powerful tool when done correctly.
And we'll get into the when done correctly because it can also lead you astray. So this is for you if you want to do more testing, no matter what size shop you're at. We should be clear about that. This doesn't just apply to the big shops, also to small shops. And our roadmap is we're going to talk about why you should be testing, what you might be testing, how to set up a test, when does it even make sense to test, how do you even know if it's worth the test, so choosing what you're going to test. And then we'll also get into the difference between testing stuff like a pure A/B test and just trying stuff, which is not a pure A/B test. So let's start here, Ronen. You test a bunch at your shop at the Nature Conservancy of Canada. What is the why behind testing? Why would you be investing so much time and energy into testing?
I mean, it's a great place to start because we do a ton of testing here. Generally speaking, we try and have one test on every one of our outbound packages or campaigns we're running. We don't always hit that mark, but we do so because we're trying to improve. We have our established baselines where we know what we can expect to get from a channel, from a campaign, and we're just trying to nudge it in the right direction, whether that's through a small marginal gain in response rate or a big swing in average gift value. Over time, those marginal increments make up a massive difference in results, in value. And so we plan out our tests on an annual basis when we do our business planning, but we review them every quarter to say what's coming up, what are we testing, and does that still make sense? That's also when we review our hypotheses and what we expect each of the tests to do to make sure it still fits with our overall plan.
Yeah. I'm going to inverse the problem a little bit, which is
Sure.
instead of why test, what happens if you don't test? What are sort of the negative consequences of not having that attitude of we should be testing all the time?
In a word, stagnation. I mean, if you don't test, you'll still make revenues. You'll probably still get the same donors that are already giving to you through your existing tactics to continue supporting you. And that'll be fine for a year or two, 3, 5, who knows how long. But eventually your donor base will start to change. Demographics will kick in. Your donor base will either move on from your cause or even pass away. And if you're not staying current with their giving preferences and putting in front of them value propositions that still appeal to them, your donor base will inevitably shrink and your revenues will suffer.
Yeah. We've all been in this situation where maybe we go to a conference or we listen to a podcast or we talk to someone and they're doing this really cool thing. And we're like, that's the silver bullet for us. And we go back to our shop and we're like, we need to do that thing. Did you hear? The Ronen at Nature Conservancy is doing this thing. We should be doing that. And that is I'm not saying that's an unhelpful attitude. It's amazing to be inspired by what other people are doing, but we often skip the easier step and maybe the most meaningful, which is the people right in front of us already. What can we begin testing with them and start improving against ourselves, our own benchmark versus somebody else's benchmark?
Mhm.
How would somebody make this case for testing internally when maybe they don't call the shots, maybe they don't hold a budget, or maybe the tests scare leadership? It's like, you want to do what? You want to do testing on our donors?
Testing does scare leadership. Testing scares a lot of people. And just that one thing before I get into how you talk to leadership about it, you mentioned that silver bullet, you go to a conference or you hear this crazy good idea. It's great to be inspired by tests that you hear others doing or any kind of fundraising initiative. Just remember that your donor base is unique to your organization, and every donor base does have different preferences. Just because my donors respond to a certain creative approach that we take with our envelopes does not mean it's going to work for your donor base. So make sure that you are applying some of your own insights and knowledge of your donors to what you hear today or anywhere. But back to your question, Mike, talking to leadership, this really comes down to making just a sound business case and writing down your expected results and the reason behind the test. We call this registering our hypotheses at my team at NCC. So why would you ever test? You're trying to improve. Improve what? It can vary. You might be trying to increase the response rate, like I said, or get more revenue per donor, or maybe this new tactic will get monthly donors instead of cash donors. It could be anything under the sun. The goal of doing that is to increase your net revenue or increase your donor count or do something else that is positive to the organization. If you're able to just write out a very simple brief about what you're interested in testing, why it's going to work, and what the expected outcome would be, why it's beneficial for the organization, I don't know a single person in leadership that would turn down that insight. Because even if your hypothesis is wrong, you lay out a plan of attack for the test, says, I'm going to do this new craft envelope instead of a regular envelope because I think it's going to get more responses because it gets opened more. Reasonable hypothesis. And that doesn't happen, and you've spent a bit more money on those new craft envelopes than you normally would have, well, you've learned something. You've learned then that you don't need to spend money on that piece of collateral, on that component. And now you can spend your limited budget elsewhere. So even a failed test is still incredibly valuable for your team. Again, as long as you set it up at the front end correctly.
Yeah. Something we've sometimes had to do is, and I think this might be helpful if leadership is not on board. Um, you probably have two things in place. You probably have organizational values in place that are defined, hopefully, because nonprofits sometimes aren't very imaginative. They're often things like we're innovative or like we're always learning. And it's one of those like you can find a value that you can use to justify your test and go to your
Bold.
boss and be like, you know what, one of our values is to be bold. I've been putting my noggin to work here to see how we can do that, and I think I came up with an idea. Here's how we can be more bold.
Is your organization bold? Are you change makers? Are you inspiring? Uh, there's for sure something. Every organization has
Yeah.
a good mission statement. We all have great values. We are, after all, trying to service the collective good. No one here has a value of let's be greedy.
Mhm.
So I'm sure there's something that you can tap into at your org and talk to people like you, Mike, or your colleagues. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Another
gotta
thing
be there's gotta be a way in.
there's got to be, yeah. Another thing, you probably have a strategic plan in place.
Yeah.
And in that plan, there's going to be something about revenue. And there's going to be some goal of increasing revenue or like increasing donor participation. Something like that is almost always going to be in there. And that's another place you can point to and be like, hey, on a roadmap of trying to get to this many donors or this much revenue, whatever it is. I just feel like we need to be trying stuff to get there. Don't you think that might be a great idea? And
With those conversations though, I'd really hammer home the point that if the desired outcome does not happen, the test is not successful, what will you learn instead? And you might
yeah,
not know that at the outset, but the fact that there's going to be a learning, no
yeah.
matter what the outcome is, again, that's almost universally desired by leadership. Leadership loves it when the institutional knowledge is deepened. So testing is how you can deepen that institutional knowledge.
Yeah, action always yields to information,
Yeah.
and some of that information is going to help you grow, and some of it is going to be like that doesn't work for us. So next time we hear somebody at a conference say you should try this, you can be like, it's amazing that it works for them. We know it doesn't work for us, and we can focus our energy on the next test to
Yeah.
to figure out what works for us. Okay, so today's episode is brought to you by the Build Good Fundraising Academy. If you feel busy and maybe a little bit overwhelmed by all the information online about how to raise more money for your organization, well, then the Build Good Fundraising Academy might be the place for you because it's not just a course, it's not just information, it's actual people on the other end of a Zoom chat looking at your fundraising and helping you. You'll be guided by our Build Good team as we help you make fundraising plans, help you edit your appeals, come up with ways to engage your donors, rewrite thank you letters, create online ads, create donor surveys, and ultimately help you feel more confident and raise more money, all while being part of a community of fundraisers who are committed to learning and growing. If you'd like to learn more about this incredible community, visit buildgood.com/academy. Figure out what works for us. Okay, so we're all in on testing. We're gonna do this. You've convinced us. We're gonna, if leadership isn't on board already, we are gonna make a strong case for it. Now the rubber starts to hit the road, and we have to begin testing. So maybe we're a bit overwhelmed. We're like, oh man, what should the first test be? What should we test? Where do I start?
So the place I always start is something that you mentioned already, the strategic plan. Or if you don't have a strategic plan, then at least your budget or some kind of strategic document that gives you a driver. Because that driver will inform where you should focus. For example, is your organization on a growth path? Okay, if you are, then that means you need to be focused on trying to either grow your donor base, so improving your acquisition, or getting more revenue from your existing donors, increasing the value. Whereas if your strategic plan is to instead retrench and consolidate, well, maybe you're focusing instead on maintaining your retention of existing donors, or you're looking to do things at a lower cost per package without sacrificing results. So based on your org strategy and your fundraising strategy, you'll want to get to a different final outcome. Once you key into a final outcome that makes sense for you, and again, there could be multiple. You might want to both get new donors and reduce cost per packages without sacrificing results. Pick one. You pick one desired outcome. Then you key in on an audience. So again, let's say we're talking about we want to increase our donor base. We need to increase acquisition results. Let's focus on a mass market direct mail audience, or let's focus on our digital audience, or let's focus on our potential monthly audience. Who are you trying to grow? Once you got your target audience, then look at, okay, what are we going to do? And we're building out the 3 concentric circles of why, who, and what. So starting with the why, just like all those famous management consultants talk about. When you know the purpose, then you know your audience, and then you can look at the actual test itself. That's the final step almost. It's the window dressing, if you will. You got to start with the desired outcome, the purpose, who you're talking to, and then build a test that can achieve those results. And the reason that the test comes, like the actual test itself of what you're deploying to market comes at the end, is because it could be anything. It's only limited by your imagination. And let's build out that donor acquisition example to help out. You might want to grow your donor base because you feel like you're stagnating. And you're going to, so you want to find a way to acquire more donors with a direct mail package, a prospect package than you're currently doing. Okay, you know that you're currently getting, let's call it 1% response rate. So you've got your baseline. You're trying to get more donors. That means you're going to try and increase your response rate on that package. You decide that the best way to increase that response rate is to make your coupon easier to use. So you take your existing coupon, you have it laid out, first name, last name, payment options, gift value, and you say, we've got all these check boxes of let us trade your name, and do you want to hear from us about this and hear from us about that? And we have a blurb here where you can write back something, and you think it's too noisy. There's too many options for people to choose from, and it leads to analysis paralysis. So you're going to design a new coupon that gets rid of everything except for the most necessary information. But everything else in the package stays the same. And you're going to deploy those both to market and see which one does better. And so by doing so, you are stating in advance what your hypothesis is. That the goal is to get more donors. The obstacle on direct mail donors is the fact that your coupon is too difficult to use and is leading to people feeling paralyzed. So they're not sending it back. And so you're going to test a current coupon and its 1% rate against a new one that makes it easier to use, that reduces the friction for potential audience members. And in doing so, you will get a higher response rate. That's a very clear hypothesis. And now the results come in, and you get to see if you were right or wrong. And you wait for the campaign to wrap up. And if, let's say, you see a 1.2% response rate, and it's statistically significant, which you can talk about later, you can say, great, this worked. And it worked for the same reason that we expected it to work. Or maybe you get the exact same response rate. You know, it's 1.1%, something like 1.01%, I mean. And now you're saying, I guess it didn't really make a difference. So maybe if we want to increase our donor base from this channel, we have to think of something else that could drive them, because this particular change did not evoke a higher response rate. The coupon itself could still use work, but maybe instead you need more compelling creative in the letter. Maybe instead you need a flashier OE or a different feeling outer envelope that will be noticed by the donor as they get their big stack of mail. It could be 100 things. But the key is that you choose one of them and you test it and you explain why you think that one is going to make a change to your response rate or average gift value or anything.
Okay, so we have to test one thing. We have to choose one. There's all these different things we could test. depending on what our overall organizational goal and strategy is for fundraising. But we've narrowed it down and we know that, hey, we want to increase net new donors, like acquisition is a priority. And so we're going to just start testing on acquisition and make that more effective. Why can we only choose one thing to test at a time? What if we want to test like multiple things? Because we've got like so many good ideas on how to improve this thing.
That because these things are hard to do, and there's so many factors at play that influence the results that you need to zero in on the one driver. And I've actually got a story just about selecting the driver and then interpreting the results from that. It was a much earlier stop in my career where an organization that I had just stepped into, it was in the midst of a test at that time, where they had taken their regular prospect acquisition package, a number 10 white outer envelope, and they actually did put a craft outer envelope against it. So they took their entire list trade for prospect acquisition, divided in two, half of them got the same letter, insert, reply envelope, and a number 10 outer envelope. The other half got all those same internal components, but it was in that kind of brown, rough feeling craft envelope. And they expected that it would do better. That's all that was said. It's going to do better in the craft envelope. Okay, so I come in and we wait about 90 days to get the results. And we see the results. And according to our vendor at the time, the craft envelope won. Well, that's great. It got more net revenue. Then you peek under the hood, and the craft envelope actually had a lower response rate, and it had fewer new donors. It got a higher net revenue because of a higher average gift value. And why have a higher average gift value? That's because within the prospect package, you have your deeply lapsed donors who have not given for like 3+ years, and their ask formula was based off their last gift value, which on the test patch, the craft envelope, was several dollars higher than the deeply lapsed donors on the control package. Just happened to be that way. But if you're multiplying someone's last gift by a fixed amount, and you start at a higher point than the other package, you're going to end up with a higher set of gift asks on the coupon. So you're going to end up with a higher average gift amount. Until that point, the organization and the vendor were both saying, we should move forward with the craft envelope. Yeah, it's more expensive, but look at the net revenue, it's better. Because the only hypothesis in the test was, this will do better. Instead of saying, this will do better at acquiring new donors. Had that been stated, they would have made the right choice. It took a long time to undo that misinterpretation of the results. But that's why you key in on one thing, because overall results can be affected by a slew of factors. I mean, we all have so much going on. You need to basically break through the clutter for your donors or prospective donors. They got to actually see your piece, and then they have to decide to respond. A lot of things have to go right to get a gift.
Yeah.
So you need to be sure that what you're measuring is actually influencing the aspect of going right and not just happenstance.
Right. Okay, so we're going to test one thing at a time, and our hypothesis actually has to be really specific and clear. We expect this will happen, it will affect this metric. Hopefully, it will affect this metric by this much or more for us to feel like it was a good test. So be super specific and clear. Makes sense, one thing at a time. Makes sense, we're testing one thing at a time. That means we're always gonna sort of wait on results and then run the next test. Now we're starting to get a little bit impatient because, like I said, we have all these great ideas, but we can only test one at a time. And every test, if it's mail, might take 90 days. If it's digital, might take 9 days or less. But I've got all these great ideas. I'm gonna test only one at a time. I got 10 ideas. Which one do I start with? They're already all ideas that we agreed are going to help our organizational goals, which is, let's say, improve donor acquisition. Which of these 10 do I start with?
Honestly, as long as they align to your strategic plan and you feel reasonably good about them, there's no there is no silver bullet about what test is the best ones. There are easier ones, sure, and there are some that will potentially have a bigger response or a bigger impact on you. And that's the rubric that we use here to prioritize. We have two factors. What's the impact going to be on our revenues, on our donors, on our feeling good about ourselves? And how easy or how much effort will it take to actually test this? So, for example, having an email test where we're just changing the subject line, it's a pretty easy test to do. It's also probably going to yield a relatively marginal return because you're just really hoping that a better subject line typically gets more clicks on the email, gets your open rate higher, but doesn't usually have any bearing on click-through conversion. Whereas a longitudinal study that you're running for like 18 or 24 months, where you break out your entire donor base into two different cohorts and you give them different sets of communication over a long period of time to measure a change in lifetime value. Whew, those are hard to do. They're also incredibly impactful because if you key in on the right sequence of messages, you can increase your gifts per donor per year. You can increase your lifetime value. You can get more monthly conversions. You can do a whole bunch of things there. But that requires focus and a very well-equipped database team and a partner that is developing the creative on board. And you need to keep your eye on all the different cohorts as they move up and down. It's tough to do.
Mhm.
So it's important to understand your capacity, your team's capacity, any of your vendors' capacities as well. Be truthful, have good candid conversations with them about what they can and can't handle, what they feel up for. And then understand how far you can go and try and guess what the benefit would be of any of your proposed tests. Don't stretch your team too thin. Pick the ones that you can do within your capacity limitations that will have the biggest impact as you foresee them.
Yeah.
But your guess is the best one.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. We scored on impact and effort. Give each of them a score. What kind of impact do we think it's going to have out of 10? And how easy is it to implement out of 10? And kind of average it out and say, okay, here's a bit of a priority score. And then use just your critical thinking of like, okay, this is what we scored it at. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
I mean, we leave good ideas on the table here all the time.
Yeah.
Just because between expense reports and basic report on campaigns and deploying things on time, which is the most important thing. Some ideas just cannot be executed.
Yeah.
You mentioned this thing about critical thinking, though, which I do want to jump on if that's all right with you.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get into critical thinking.
Because we're talking about making these hypotheses and then you're measuring the results and being as specific as possible and forecasting what will the impact be of a test. Well, that requires critical thinking. But then you get back the test results, and that's really where it's your time to shine as the fundraiser. That's where the critical thinking comes into play.
Mhm.
Because you're going to get your results and you've got your hypothesis and what happened, match your hypothesis. Okay. Do you now do it for everything moving forward? Do you pick
Matching gifts for everyone going forward all the time.
matching gifts do better, right? If you were to put a match gift against a
Yeah.
non-match gift, I guarantee you the match gift is going to win.
Yeah.
But if you then start doing a match gift for every package, well, now you have to do a match gift because now your donors that are trained to expect it. Uh-oh, your major gift team is struggling to get a match gift, and now your packet that you were depending on for a 10% response rate is going to get 2. So just because something works better does not mean you need to roll it out every single time. You do need to think critically about what are the implications for your program, for your organization, for your donors, if you roll it out. Even something like removing a field on a donation form online. Actually, we did this recently. We removed the comment box on our donation form because in our perspective, the fundraising teams, it was creating a lot of friction for the donors. Even though it wasn't a mandatory field, you get this big empty box. I guess they want me to write something. What should I write? And we're getting a lot of noise. It led to some people dropping off.
Yeah.
It was not a helpful field for overall fundraising. And when we did the test against it, we saw that the conversion rate went up when we got rid of the comment box. But we had to apply some critical thinking after, because it was a very useful field for our colleagues who do major giving. It was very useful for our colleagues who actually process the gifts, because some donors would specify where they want their gift to go to, or they want to show appreciation for somebody who had led them on a tour or something like that. So we still moved forward with the results because they were very compelling, but we had to adjust our internal processes to create a flow for inbound donor comments or complaints that would still reach the right person. That's what I mean by critical thinking. You might get a good fundraising result, but there are other aspects that need to be factored in here.
Yeah. What if you don't get a compelling result either way? You get a semi-compelling result, or it's like, okay, this, I don't know, maybe, yeah, like things did work. The hypothesis is sort of here, like the revenue went up or response rate went up, or we did acquire a few more donors. And maybe it even validates, but it's like you get the sense that, is it really because of our hypothesis, or is something else going on here?
Depends on the situation, to be honest. And again, it's going to depend on your own critical thinking of the situation and how far off you are. I will say there's no harm in ever rerunning the test if you get a convoluted result. We're doing that right now, where we're testing our house donors, our existing donors, on the renewal package, where we changed the offer, the value of the gifts on the coupons, expecting that the response rate would go up because the numbers were not manicured. They didn't end in fives or zeros. They ended in like sevens and nines and threes. They were ugly numbers. That group didn't respond at a higher rate, but they gave a ton more in average gift value, which was not expected. They were just selecting higher gift options on the coupon. We don't know why, but it's a really interesting result. So we're going to rerun the test and see if it repeats itself. Because if it repeats itself, well, we've stumbled onto something here. It's really fascinating that ugly numbers get a higher average gift value. If it doesn't happen again, then it was just noise. So even though it did well and did better, it was not because it's not why we thought it was going to do well. So we're going to run it again.
And you stumbled into that by trying to improve response rate. Response rate did not improve, but gift value did.
Yeah.
So
it was almost identical response rates. The only thing that differed was the average gift value. It was honestly really fascinating and cool to a data nerd like me.
yeah.
At other times, though, if you get a result that is pretty good, maybe not exactly what you specified, you might opt to just roll with it. It depends on, again, the impact of that decision and what else might be influencing it. A simple one here would be, it's never happened, but if you start including postage paid envelopes in your direct mail packages and you see only a slight uptick in response rate compared to not including a postage paid envelope, well, you can reasonably think that the inclusion of a mechanism that would get the gifts back to you without costing anything to the donor will get back more results because you're removing a huge source of friction. So yes, we're going to use postage paid envelopes in all of our packages moving forward, but you have to be able to rationalize it in the cold light of day, not just because you want it to be that.
And sometimes the rationalization is also just like, it's a service to our donors. If it improves response or not, it's a service we can do for them, is to just pay for that envelope.
Absolutely. That could be one of your factors for consideration. The whole world of testing here, as much as there are vast swaths of data, and you can do Z testing to make sure it's statistically significant and say objectively this is the right thing to do, a lot of this still comes down to how you interpret and evaluate the results. I like to say that if you give 10 different analysts the same data set, you're going to get 10 different recommendations. It depends entirely on your perspective, what you were trying to achieve. So keep that hypothesis again. That's your North Star. What were you trying to get out of this? Did that happen? Okay, you got a reason good shot at making it happen again.
We're going to end with two questions here. We're running out of time, but I want to talk about the fact that sometimes A/B testing gives us a very local result. Like for this situation, this happened, and we got like a result that validated, and that's great. Does that mean that's the right thing to do going forward? We already talked a little bit about that, about like matching gifts, they work. Does that mean you do it every time? On this podcast, we had David Kravenchuk years ago at the beginning of this podcast, and he told a story of, your story of removing fields from the coupon to make it less friction. He removed the field that said, I would like more information about leaving a gift in my will, as part of a whole bunch of checkboxes that he removed. And it was great. Like response rate went up. Great. Then the new reply coupon is working. And 6 to 8 months later, the planned giving team was like, what happened to all of our leads, David? You used to send us leads all the time. He's like, what are you talking about? Our results are up. It's fantastic. We made some changes. Things are looking up. And they're like, yeah, but that's like, how many leads we get every month? And this was for the University of Alberta. And I think they did the math. It was like $40 million worth of potential planned gifts that they kind of missed out on by taking that out. So let's talk a little bit about like this sort of like A/B test, how much to read into that versus like in the long run, and if we can't run a longitudinal test, but like balancing that out against, is this the right thing to do in the long run and down the road?
Again, it depends on what you're testing. That example from David about removing the I want to hear but gets my will, you need to factor that into the final decision point. If the only factor was, well, we need to get our donors to respond at a higher rate because we're losing donors left, right, and center, it might still be the right call. It might still be the right decision to sacrifice that long-term bequest potential for donors right now, because if your donors are not renewing, they're also not going to leave you bequests down the road. So it depends on where you're starting and what that hypothesis was, the importance of it. Otherwise, if it's confined, nothing's really confined to your own world, but to the extent that it's confined to your world of mass marketing or even relationship fundraising or whatever you're doing, you can see if the outcomes, the results of your program align with what you hoped would, and try and see what other stakeholders are impacted by that work. Again, whether that's your IT department, your database team, your major giving team, there are likely hidden stakeholders that you're not aware of that are negatively or positively impacted by your tests. Just because someone is negatively impacted does not mean you should not move forward with the results of the test. But that becomes a discussion and a decision point where, in this case, maybe the value of bequests was too great, and so they should not have rolled out the results of their test onto every subsequent package. But maybe a combination could have been reached where, they'd include the gift and will information on 2 or 3 packages of the year, and the rest would have it removed. That way they maintain the good results of a simpler coupon. But that requires discussion and, again, critical thinking with your colleagues.
Yeah, we A/B tested a full page reply coupon versus just the bottom tear off coupon, and for a homeless shelter, great results. Everybody's stoked until gift processing comes in, and they're like, "What the heck are all these full page reply coupons?" And we have the scanner; it's set up for these little coupons, whatever. And you're like, okay, didn't think of that. That's one of those like should have involved more stakeholders here.
That was one of the bigger discussions we had here when we shifted to full page coupons as well. We tested about 4 years ago, and it was so dramatically improved that we've used them on about 70-80% of our coupons now have a full page coupon. But that was a discussion with our colleagues who process the gifts, because they have to bear the burden of actually processing them. And
Yeah.
in fact, more difficult discussion was had about not having the scan line on our mid-level packages. That
Hmm.
way they'd feel less mass markety and
Yep.
feel more personal. And nobody wants to see their name next to an RFID line, which is going to get scanned. You're just one in a million. And that's the conversation we had with our colleagues in that department to explain here's why this cannot have a scan line, a barcode. This is why it's going to take more time. And here's the volume of gifts. Can that be tolerated? Yes, great. But that's a discussion.
Yep. Let's end here. The difference between testing and trying. Because sometimes you can't test. Maybe your list isn't big enough. We haven't even gotten into the fact that tests have to validate, but the short story on that is you've got to have enough response and enough volume for tests to actually validate and be something that you might be have some confidence in. Otherwise, it could just be noise, could just be random. So if we don't have that, can we just try stuff? And can we have confidence in just like trying stuff? Or like walk us through how you might approach that.
I mean, the short answer is yes. And just trying things is fine, whether it's because you have a small audience, so it's too small sample size to meaningfully test, or you don't have the capacity to run a test, or you don't have an analyst to look at the results after, or any of a million reasons. There are reasons to just think of a good idea and roll it out. It comes back to, again, what is your hypothesis? What are you doing this for? Does this idea make sense to address that question? And what are the potential impacts? If, for example, you're saying, I think that we should increase our program to send out 12 more packages a year. You're talking about potentially spending several $100,000 more.
Right.
You might want to test that idea first. But if you are thinking that, hey, we do a lot of solicitations, but we don't do enough showing of impact to close the ask, thank, impact cycle with our donors. So why don't we do some more impact only pieces for our donors? And we think it's going to do that. It's going to be effective because it will reset
Mm-hmm.
the relationship during the year, show them what they gave has had an impact, and then they're ready to give us again. So it should increase the gifts per donor per year. The impact of that is of a negative result there is relatively low. It's a bit of over communication. You might end up with some people saying, stop emailing me so much. I'm sick of you. Take me off your list. But that person probably wasn't a great candidate for donating anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm giving you these details because it's something real that we did a couple years ago. We saw that we had way too many solicitations and not nearly enough thanking or cultivating of our donors. And so we've put in now 6 impact-only cultivation emails. Goes to our existing donors, house donors, monthly donors, low value donors, mostly. And it's just 3 small snippet stories that say, hey, here's something that happened in the past 6 months that you might not be aware of.
Nice.
Your support, whether it's this year, last year, has made this possible. Thanks so much. No donation button in the email anywhere. Not on the banner, not at the bottom, nowhere. The idea is to give them a hard break from these solicitations and reset them so that they're ready for the next one. So far, it's had marginal impact at best. I would say that a tiny uptick in gifts per donors per year, but it has not had a big negative impact, and we did not test that. We just hypothesized it would be a good result for them. It would make them feel better about our work and would not cause too negative a situation. So we rolled it out.
Right. Yeah. In flywheel language, you've added more celebrating, which is amazing. Celebrating and reporting. And it's hard to, you cannot measure donor well-being all that well, or donor satisfaction or autonomy. There are some ways through surveys to do that, but even if the results are marginal, is there's a chance that delivering that bit of joy is actually meaningfully contributing to donors thinking more fondly and being more happy to be involved with you.
I mean, on that point, though, that's why I value our inbound customer service team so heavily here. And if you have a team, anybody listening to this, if you have a donor services team that is on the phones and responding to emails, talk to them more than you already do, because that is your only active mouthpiece to donors. They are getting really rich data from people who care enough about your organization to pick up the phone and call or write you an email. Oh my God, talk to them, find out what is being said about your packages and what people want to hear about. That will be that you can just roll out.
And that's a nice bookend to how we start the conversation, which is listening to donors through data and through donor conversations. Ronen, where can people find you if they want to know more about you and sort of see what you're up to in the world?
I am always happy to talk to anybody about fundraising, about testing, about anything really, especially in this world. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Ronen Tal, CFRE, so RONEN, last name TAL. Or you can just email me, ronen.tal@natureconservancy.ca. Happy to chat anytime.
Thanks, Ronen. Well, that's all for today. Here's my very short action plan for you today. If you've never tested anything, go and test one thing. Whether you get a result that validates or not, get that rep under your belt. Just start building some scar tissue, so to speak. Just start doing it. Because A, it's fun. B, you're going to learn how to write a hypothesis, how to actually roll this out, how to get some people on board. And that will just give you confidence to keep doing it. And if you're already testing and you don't have very solid hypotheses for what you're trying to find out that are very specifically and clearly defined, then start today. As always, thank you for hanging out with us around the fundraising campfire. It's hard to A/B test with podcasts, so we're going to try something. We've never asked you to give us feedback on something you've implemented. So if you go and you actually do an A/B test and you haven't done one before, I want you to email me at hello@buildgood.com. Say, hey, Mike, we've tried this thing. We've A/B tested it. 2 to 3 sentences. Let me know how it goes. We'd love to hear from you. This is our test on this podcast. If you want to be on our growth newsletter, if you want more growth tips, if you want to be alerted of new podcast episodes and events, just go to buildgood.com, type in your email address somewhere. The big secret is it all goes to the same place, no matter for what you sign up for, and you'll be in our world. As always, if you're listening to this, you're my kind of people. I'm your kind of people. Thank you for the work you do. I'm your host, Mike Dirksen, cheering you on as you do good in the world.